Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. So I mentioned there have been like three people that I've kicked off of my tour throughout my time as a tour guide. The second one I ever had to kick off my tour. This group arrived really high. And like high people on the tours, that's often great. They're funny. They ask silly questions. They are often really amused at your jokes. And quite often, they are really startled and scared by things that no one else is startled and scared by. So it sort of makes you feel like you're doing an amazing job. But there reaches a point that people are just too high. And that's where this group was. So they kept asking some really disruptive and ridiculous questions, like they'd interrupt the tour to ask questions, but mostly I had them settled down by the end of the stop. They'd figured out that they need to wait to the end of the story to ask questions, that they should not be talking to the other guests while I'm trying to talk, and for that matter, they'd also realized that all the other guests were glaring at them, and I think they realized that all the other guests wanted them to stop talking to them entirely. But between the first stop and the second stop, which, by the way, the first stop on this tour is about a woman born in the late 1700s. She is just a strong woman. There is nothing scary about her, except for, property ownership stuff. But between these two stops, one of the girls comes up to me and is like, "So, the spooky lady in the first stop, did she go to Tulane?" And I'm like, no. I don't know exactly when Tulane was founded, but no. But my other favorite was that girl then launched into a really long rant about the fact that she'd gone to Catholic school and absolutely hated it because, like, all the nuns hated her and were always so mean to her. The very next stop, I'm talking about a saint, and she raises her hand in the middle of the story to ask me, "What's a saint?" And I'm like, "I think I know why the nuns hated you." But they also asked a lot of the more common ridiculous questions, like, "Whoa, there's a river?" But eventually it got to be too bad because they were talking while I was talking almost constantly, and they were smoking almost constantly. And even though I'd told them 3 or 4 times they needed to step away to do this, especially considering one of the other ladies in the tour had mentioned that she had asthma and this was really bothering her, they would just stand in a circle all facing each other right in front of me, and there'd be puffs of smoke coming out of this circle as if somehow I was blind and couldn't see that. And so I stopped in the middle of a couple stops to be like, "Guys, I've told you, if you're going to smoke, you need to step aside." And that was the first time I gave them a warning of like, "Look, if you don't stop, you're going to need to leave the tour." And they're like, "Well, it's just a vape." And I'm like, "It doesn't matter. You need to obey the rules." And that means smoking on the exterior of the group, downwind, away from everybody else. And they sort of rolled their eyes and kept talking. And then they started making snide comments about me while we were walking to the next stop. And the next stop was one of the more crowded ones. And that one I always stop and give people a warning of, "Hey, we're coming to a crowded spot. I need y'all to be on your best behavior and not bother the other groups." And as we're walking by the other groups, they're screaming stuff. And I eventually have to stop, like, while we're walking by other groups to be like, "Guys, shut up." And we get to the next location. I find us a spot that's a bit further away than I usually would have parked, but I was afraid about how my guests were going to act with all the other groups. And I know I'm going to have to be louder than I usually am, so I want to be further away from all the other groups. And I launch into my story, and sure enough, the guys in the back, and it wasn't just guys and girls, but the guy was the loudest one, start talking at the top of their lungs. And to make it worse, this is a story about enslavement, and they're making jokes and laughing. So finally, I'm just like, "Guys, shut up or leave." And the guy starts yelling at me about how, "You can't make me leave. I paid for this, and I'm just sitting here trying to have fun. We're all trying to have fun." And as usual, another guest gets involved and it's like, "Yeah, we're trying to have fun too, and you're ruining it for everybody else." And this is going on, and it's getting worse and worse. And I'm like, "Okay, guys, just leave." And they're like, "You can't. You're going to have to make us." And I'm like, "Okay," pulling out my phone to call the cops. And finally, They walk away. Meanwhile, I can see groups all the way up and down the street watching us. And to make it worse, the group doesn't walk away from these other groups. They walk straight towards the other groups. Hell, they walk over and join a friend of mine's tour. And of course, I'm now watching this being like, oh god, do I have to go help Michael? But luckily, Michael was at the end of his tour, and I later found out what had happened was they had walked by right when he was mentioning that he was a veteran. And so they stopped to discuss military service with him for a few minutes, and to just casually mention in passing that they hated their tour and had to leave, which, not what happened. But otherwise, it wasn't that big of a disruption, so at least Michael was able to continue his tour. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.